Namaskar to everybody. Thank you so much for making yourself present today for this very important conversation. I greet you all in the peaceful name of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, a man who's had an impact on many lives here today. And I think the start of this journey into the commemoration of 150 years of Gandhiji's philosophy is sharing our personal experiences of Gandhi and the impact and the influence that has had on us as people. I can think of no better person as Ella Gandhi to start that conversation off with. Of course, the granddaughter of Gandhiji. Ma'am, thank you so much for your time. I know it must be a very special time for you.
Gandhiji's influence has had a great impact on me and on many other people as well. But it's work in progress.
Yeah.
We're trying to attain some of the teachings, but it's slow,
Yeah.
it's difficult, and it's work in progress.
You know, often when we talk about Gandhiji's legacy and what he's left behind, I think we do it in two ways. We do it in the present, how can we implement it now? And we do it in the future, how can we create that culture? I want to take it back several years to when you was just 6 years old, a little girl running around in India. And that's when you first met your grandfather. Talk to me about those experiences, because I wonder if we know much of it.
Yeah, I feel so privileged that my parents decided to go to India in around 1946-47 period. And at that time, we spent about 3 months in Gandhiji's ashram, Sevagram ashram, and then later in Pune at there was a sanatorium in Pune where I went with my mother and spent some time there with Gandhiji. So on both those occasions, I remember, getting this tremendous experience of being with Gandhiji. For me, as a little child, he was a grandfather, and he was a wonderful grandfather. He was very warm, very loving. I remember that when I was with him, his attention was entirely devoted to me. And he would listen to whatever I had to say. And when we came back in 1940, towards the end of 46 and beginning of 47, he wrote letters to me, two
It was
letters.
a difficult time for him, though. He was going through so much during that time. Of course, India walking toward independence. He wasn't happy about partition. And he writes you a letter.
Yes, he wrote me a letter. And when I think of it, so many of us would write to the adults, we would write to parents, and we would say, give our love to, the children and that sort of thing. But no, Gandhiji wrote personally to me as a 6-year-old. And during that time, when he was so stressed, so busy. So it just shows, number one, the love that he had for us. And number two, the respect that he showed to little children in order to, to write to us. And to write to us, importantly, he told me that I should learn to observe silence. And when we think of it today, how important silence is. Because that is when you can contemplate, that is when you can think about what you're going to say, what you're going to do, how you're going to lead your life. All those things happen when you have a moment or a time of silence. So it's so important, and this is what he, told me. So he was writing to me as if I was an adult. And that respect, I think, is very, very important. And I feel that today, in today's world, respect is one of the very, very important aspects. Because if we learn to respect people as individuals, regardless of your age, regardless of your race, regardless of your beliefs, you respect each other, then we wouldn't have the kind of problems that we have today.
Yeah. I mean, you say respect was a great fundamental you took from your grandfather. He wrote you a letter. He addressed a letter to you at 6 years old. And one then begins to think about, the Gandhi family itself, having this legacy to uphold and to live, such gravitas of a man. Um, was it at any point challenging for the descendants of Mahatma Gandhi to implement this, to imbibe and inculcate this philosophy of respect that you speak of?
Yes, it is difficult because sometimes we don't know what other people expect of us. We, as I said at the outset, that we are trying, but we're not there. We are not Mahatma Gandhi.
Mhm.
We are his family, and we try to implement his ideas. But if we fail, we say, forgive us for that.
Mhm.
But we are trying. And I think that, it's so important, not just for myself, because I'm not talking now just about me, but about all the people who have been influenced by
Mhm.
him. It is so important to understand that when you want to change people or when you want to bring about changes,
Mhm.
when you see injustices happening in the world, as we had in this country during the time of apartheid,
Yeah.
you have to do something to change that. So it is about change, changing the attitudes of people, changing the racist attitudes, changing the idea of discriminating against a person. No matter what the discrimination is about, you shouldn't discriminate against people on the basis of whatever, whether it's religious
Yeah.
discrimination, race discrimination, whatever it is.
Mhm.
We shouldn't discriminate against others.
Mm.
But to change that attitude, you can only change it through love and respect.
Yeah. And was that the lesson, the
That's-
experience that was given to you at 6 years old and subsequently your family? Was that actually the experience you remember of Gandhi, of spreading that message of not to discriminate against another just because that is another?
Yes, absolutely. That was a very important lesson that we learned from early childhood. It became sort of just a part of our lives. So we weren't conscious of it.
Yeah.
But, we just respected people. We accepted everyone.
Mm.
And I know that in my lifetime, I was banned and I was arrested. And there were so-called special branch
Yeah.
people who were the people who would come and serve the banning order on you. They used to be the people who would, also see if you are breaking the banning order, spy on you,
Mm.
and that sort of thing. So
It was a
one
cruel
would,
time, yeah.
it was a difficult time because they were quite nasty at times, and to still talk to them with respect was difficult,
Yeah.
but we did.
You had to tap into that.
We did, yes.
It raises an interesting point on Gandhian philosophy, and I think, while we're talking about others here in that respect of how do you treat others, it also identifies very greatly with the self, meaning the way you treat others should be the way you would want to be treated, because I think violence against another, according to Gandhian philosophy, is then tantamount to violence upon yourself. Help me understand that very important link.
Well, Gandhiji said that if you deal with violence, you end up at, having the whole world blind.
Mhm.
If you treat other people with the same kind of violence as they treat you with. So to counteract violence, you have to have something different.
Yeah.
And that something different is compassion, it's empathy, it's love, it's, showing respect. And in that way, you are able to change the person.
Many have written so many texts on this, that the world in a multimedia modern society is identifying more with the ego, and therefore it's easier to not care about the way you treat others. It's easier, it's becoming more commonplace to not spare thought about the impact your action has on another. It's all about you. Advice then?
I think a big lesson from Gandhiji was that, there's no quick fixes.
Yeah.
You can't expect things to just change overnight. It's a slow process. But a slow process at the end of the day is a more permanent or a more lasting process than the quick fix
Yeah.
that you try to make. So today we are very impatient. We want things to change immediately.
Yeah.
And so when we can't change things immediately, we use violence, we use all kinds of remedies that, bring about quick fixes, like putting the person away, hang the man, or do those kinds of things.
I think this the first Satya Vaarta that we have on the occasion in the celebration of 150 years of Gandhian philosophy and Gandhiji. Um, and on that note, one can then not distance this entire memory from truth. And and I think globally there's this strong pursuit for truth, with many people wanting answers as to why they were wronged or why they had to suffer an injustice. Um, and when you observe that, what do you think should be the mechanism to provide that truth? Because ultimately, I think, according to Gandhi, all humans heal best under truth.
Gandhiji said, that truth is not one. There's a lot of truths in the world. So each person sees truth in their own, the way they would observe truth.
Yeah.
So the most important thing is for us to begin to understand how is it that you are, seeing the issue. When you're looking at the truth, what aspect are you looking at? So to understand you, I have to have that, ability, and also, just inclination, not to be arrogant, which we are on many occasions. We think that we possess the truth. If we become humble and say, no, there are many truths.
And it's a
exceptional truth.
constant process of
It's a
education,
constant,
which was
yeah.
very close to Gandhiji's heart in terms of understanding something more about someone or something more about a situation. But I think a final question, and again back to the sentimentality of it, because I think the point of the Satya Vaarta is to understand the life experiences that people have taken from Gandhiji. Draw on one for me, one that was very special for you, and share it with the world, and encourage them to draw from that, and in that way continue the Gandhi legacy.
I think the most important thing for me, even as a little child, was that, Gandhiji was very, very courageous
Mhm.
and fearless. And, that was an important point which sort of helped me during the years of our struggle.
Yeah.
To say that no matter what happens, we have to go on fighting for justice, because justice, social justice, is important. it is the truth. Social justice is like the truth, similar. Both of them can be equal, sort of. So when you are, confronted with injustices like we were confronted with, then you can't hide away and say, let it carry on. You have to do something about it. And this was the lesson that he learned at Pietermaritzburg.
Mhm.
When he was thrown out, there were three things that he could have done. One is to say, okay, this is how South Africa is, and we have to accept it and adjust ourselves to live within the system. So live with the insults, live with the indignity, and all those things, and not do something about it. The other was to just go and say, this is a terrible country, let's get out of here,
Mhm.
and run away, which is then being a coward. You're not facing up
Yeah.
to the challenge. And the third is to stay and fight those injustices.
Mhm.
So truth and soul force is, far stronger
Mm.
and can change things. Yeah.
Well, Ms. Ella Gandhi, thanks so much for enlightening us on that and reminding us about this beautiful point, the courage behind Satyagraha. I think is a great lesson we take today. And of course, sharing those close memories. I'd love to read that letter sometime. And wish you all the best as you continue to take this legacy forward, share it with the world, and I think uphold it. Any questions?
Over the decades, there was the point in our history when we said passive resistance has failed us. And one has to understand it in the context of that time and not present this as a maxim or a principle for all times. Because the same Mandela, when he came out of prison, out of Robben Island, then understood at that new historical moment the purpose and the value of nonviolence. And it's the same with the debate between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and in so many different parts of the world to this day. And I come from the church. We had this contest in the church about a just war and about a peaceful response, nonviolent response to apartheid. So my point is that we do not have to be disillusioned with the nonviolent option when we look at history. We have to understand the moment and the context. And in the end, for me, the wonderful resolution was the way Mandela then embraced nonviolence and understood that is what he as a leader has to pursue. And I just wanted to assure Ela, as member of the family, that we go through these cycles, as it were, and it can be very depressing when Gandhi is criticized and nonviolence is criticized, and that it's not a soft option. And just her response to that. The other is a question. You don't have to answer it, but there's so much written on Gandhi over the decades. And the scholarship on Gandhi has not waned, it has increased. And the scholarship's also quite controversial. I'm not just thinking of South Africa, but across. But in the end, do you feel you need to follow this trajectory of Gandhian criticism?
We were talking about that as we were preparing for our conversation, and that's exactly the point we spoke about, that journey of the piece, the journey of that point, and the criticism against Gandhi. I don't know your thoughts on that.
Gandhiji, spoke about the whole concept of passive resistance. He's written on that quite lengthily. Because he believed that when we use the word passive resistance and the way people perceive passive resistance is that, there's a minority of people who are weak and they don't have the power that the majority has, and therefore they opt for passive resistance. This is the explanation that many people give to passive resistance, that it is the way of the weak, because you don't have the superior armaments, because you don't have numbers, therefore you opt for passive resistance. But Gandhiji said, no, that's not the reason. Actually, satyagraha requires far more courage than violence requires. And satyagraha, or soul force, is the force that can help people to change. You can't get people to change by killing them, by assaulting them, by punishing them, and that sort of thing. But you can change them through satyagraha. It's not just about demonstrations, but it's also about pressure. And we saw in our own movement that international pressure on South Africa was, one of the pillars that actually brought South Africa to the table. Had there not been that international pressure, we might still be with apartheid. So there was that international pressure, which was a peaceful way of applying pressure, of saying to them that negotiate, otherwise we are not going to support you. And that is satyagraha. So satyagraha has many dimensions, and one needs to look at those dimensions. The second thing about the criticism, most of the people who have criticized Gandhi as a human being. They haven't criticized because they don't have a proper or any argument to say that nonviolence is bad, that you shouldn't practice nonviolence. I haven't seen anyone saying that. They may say that violence is better, but they won't say that nonviolence is bad. And there's a difference between the two, a big difference. So I haven't seen criticisms of Gandhiji's ideas. When he talks about values, when he talks about empathy, when he talks about love, nobody has said that people shouldn't love. Nobody has said that people shouldn't, have empathy. So when you read the criticisms, you see that they are criticizing a human being. A human being is fallible, all of us. We all have skeletons in the cupboard. And somebody someday may take them out and say, well, this person was like this or was like that.
Yeah.
So that makes no difference, because what we taught, what we are saying, what we did is different from all those other skeletons. So that's the second point. But I just want to make one other point, and that is that, and this is a small story. I like telling stories.
Yeah.
Once Gandhiji was traveling on, in a ship, and on the ship there were some youngsters, and they decided to bring out a magazine, a little write-up, and they called it Scandal Times. So you can imagine what was in that, in those articles. And they brought it, they wrote these articles, and they brought it to Gandhiji to ask him, so what do you think? we want to distribute this amongst the passengers. And Gandhiji read this, and then he kept quiet. So these youngsters came to him and said, okay, you've read it now, so what do you think? And Gandhiji then took off the clip that was holding the papers together and gave them back all the papers. And they said, but Gandhiji, you haven't told us what you think. And he said to them, I've taken the most precious thing. Yeah.
Well, wonderfully explained, Ms. Gandhi. Any other questions? Another point you'd love to raise? I see a couple more there.
From the discussion that has emanated thus far, we could see that it is anything but passive, in a kind of negative way. Actually, it was a very active moral force, so that I thought I'd just mention that because unfortunately, that word somehow creates a kind of negative effect. But I saw it eventually that it is a powerful moral force, a very active force. Okay, thank you.
Not one single word formed the basis of partition. Partition itself, the final word has never been spoken. Not by Nehru, not by Vallabhbhai Patel, not by Rajagopalachari, none of them. None of them were able to speak the absolute truth to confirm that partition was possible. But partition became a fact of life, and to this day nobody knows that it was untruth.
Your thoughts on that partition and the journey it took through that time?
Well, there is historic evidence that India was one. It was always together. There were no two different, countries. It was one continent. But during that time, there were lots of influences, maybe untruths, maybe, I'm not sure what we have seen the film recently that was brought out. I can't remember the name, but it was about how partition took place. So there are many theories and many, historical sort of evidence and facts that have been put forward about how it happened. But the truth is that the violence that took place and the many, negotiations that Gandhiji was involved in, he wasn't happy about partition at all. And it is true that when there was, this violence taking place, the British Army was not successful in stopping the violence. They themselves have claimed that one person was able to stop the violence when the whole entire British Army couldn't stop it. And this has been recorded. It's a historic fact that he managed to stop that violence. So again, it's that, moral force of, truth that can change things. But not all of us have that capability. As I said at the beginning, I am sitting here, I am talking to you. I also want to learn from you. All of us are experimenting, like Gandhiji himself said. His life was an experiment with truth. So we're all trying to find the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, one day we will all come together and there will be no violence on this earth. Let's hope that that day would come.
We'd like to thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, a very sentimental time to have people listen to this engagement. I think it's the greatest way to take the message of Satyagraha and Gandhi's philosophy forward, because if you tell somebody else about this, then I think they'll do the same, and eventually the whole world becomes one big happy family of peace, truth, and justice. So thank you very much for your time.